This story is titled, After 10 years together, my partner said they need space to figure things out, but refuses to explain. Are they preparing to leave me, or should I be patient? It was a chilly autumn afternoon when my world began to unravel. My name is Linda, and I'm 54 years old. I've been with my partner Mark for 10 years. We live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Boston, in a house that feels like it's been built on love, laughter, and years of shared memories. Or at least that's what I thought. Mark has always been a steady presence in my life. He's not the kind of man who wears his emotions on his sleeve, but when he loves, you can feel it in his actions. He'd bring me my favorite coffee on Sunday mornings, sit through my favorite classic movies, even though he secretly hated them, and hold my hand on walks as if to say, "You're mine, and I'm yours." For a decade, I never questioned our connection. Until now. It started with a single sentence, just 8 words that turned my world upside down. I think I need some space to think. At first, I thought I misheard him. We were sitting at the dinner table, the sound of rain tapping against the window, plates of half-eaten pasta in front of us. I looked up from my plate and saw his face, calm, serious, but distant, in a way I'd never seen before. "What do you mean, space?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at me right away. He just stared down at his hands, his thumbs fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. "I don't know," he said finally. I need to figure some things out." My heart dropped. Figure what out? I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady even though I could feel panic bubbling up inside me. But he didn't answer, not really. He just shook his head and said, "I can't explain it right now. I just need time." That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. What did he mean by space? Was he unhappy? Was this about me? Or was there something else? Someone else? The next morning, Mark left for work as if nothing had happened. He kissed me on the forehead before walking out the door, like he always did. But something about it felt different. It wasn't the kiss of a man who was present. It was the kiss of someone who was already halfway out the door. I tried to go about my day as usual, but I couldn't focus. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, hoping it was a message from Mark with some kind of explanation. But there was nothing. I started replaying the past few months in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. Had he seemed distant? Stressed? Was there something I had done to push him away? But the truth was, everything had seemed normal. Perfect, even. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary a few weeks ago with a weekend getaway to Cape Cod. He'd held my hand as we watched the sunset over the water, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm so lucky to have this man. How had we gone from that moment to this? Over the next few days, Mark's behavior became increasingly confusing. He didn't leave, but he wasn't really there either. He spent more time at work, coming home late, and retreating to the spare bedroom instead of sleeping beside me. When I tried to talk to him, he'd give me vague answers, saying he was working through some things, and that he needed me to be patient. But patience was the last thing I felt. I wanted answers. I wanted to know what was going on in his head, what had changed between us. And more than anything, I wanted to know if this space he needed was his way of preparing to leave me. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So when Mark came home, I confronted him. "Mark," I said, blocking the doorway before he could retreat to the spare bedroom, "I can't do this anymore. I need to know what's going on. Are you unhappy? Is there someone else?" His eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross his face. But then he shook his head. "There's no one else," he said firmly. "It's not about that." "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice cracking, "because I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't even know why." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "I don't know how to explain it, Linda," he said. I feel like I've lost myself. Like I don't know who I am anymore." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about me. This was about him. But somehow, it felt even worse. Because if he didn't know who he was, how could he know what we were? I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to support him, to give him the space he said he needed. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. We were supposed to be a team, a partnership. How could he shut me out like this? The days turned into weeks, and the distance between us only grew. I tried to give him the space he asked for, but it felt like I was living with a stranger. He stopped eating dinner with me, stopped asking about my day, stopped doing all the little things that had once made me feel loved. And then, one evening, I found something that shattered what little hope I had left. A week after our conversation, Mark left for work like usual, but I noticed he had forgotten his phone on the kitchen counter. It wasn't something he typically did. Mark was meticulous about keeping his phone on him. For a moment, I hesitated. I'd never been the type to invade his privacy, but the doubts and unanswered questions had been eating away at me for weeks. My hands were trembling as I reached for the phone. At first, I told myself I was just looking for reassurance. Maybe I'd find a conversation with a friend about work stress, or a note to himself that would explain the space he needed. But what I found wasn't reassuring at all. There was a message thread from someone named Ellie. The name didn't ring a bell, but the familiarity in their conversation was impossible to ignore. My stomach twisted as I scrolled up, piecing together fragments of their dialogue. It wasn't explicitly romantic, but it was intimate in a way that didn't feel appropriate. Ellie, I'm here if you need to talk. You know that. Thanks, Ellie. You've been a lifesaver lately. My hands felt numb as I continued reading. Who was Ellie? And why was Mark confiding in her instead of me? When he came home that evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Who's Ellie? I asked as soon as he walked through the door. He froze, his face a mixture of surprise and guilt. What are you talking about? You left your phone this morning, I said, holding it up. I saw the messages. Mark's shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked like he might deny it. But then he sighed and said, Ellie is just a friend. Someone I've been talking to about everything. Everything? I repeated, my voice shaking. You've been talking to her about everything, but not me. I'm your partner, Mark. I'm the one who's supposed to be there for you. I know, he said, his voice quiet, but I didn't want to burden you. Ellie's just easier to talk to right now. His words felt like a slap in the face. I had spent the last decade being his partner, his confidant, his rock. And now when he was struggling, he turned to someone else? Easier? I said, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? You're shutting me out, keeping me in the dark, and confiding in some woman I don't even know. How am I supposed to feel about that, Mark? He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at me like he didn't know what to say. That night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to lie next to him, not when I felt like there was a canyon between us. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Ellie. Her number was in Mark's phone, and I told myself I just needed answers. When she picked up, her voice was friendly, almost warm. Hello? This is Linda, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mark's partner. There was a pause, and then she said, Oh, hi, Linda. Is everything okay? No, I said bluntly. It's not. I need to know who you are and what's going on between you and Mark. To my surprise, she didn't get defensive. Instead, she sounded almost apologetic. There's nothing going on between us, she said. Mark and I work together. He's been struggling lately, and I've been trying to help. That's all. Struggling with what? I asked. She hesitated. I think that's something he needs to tell you. Her response didn't make me feel any better. If Mark couldn't talk to me, but he could talk to her, what did that say about our relationship? When I confronted Mark about the call, he was furious. You had no right to do that, he said, his voice shaking with anger. And you had no right to shut me out, I shot back. We're supposed to be a team, Mark, but instead you're treating me like a stranger. His anger dissolved into something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or regret. I'm sorry, he said, running a hand through his hair. I never meant to hurt you. I've been feeling lost, Linda. Like I don't know who I am anymore, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it without making you feel like it was your fault. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, that we could work through it together. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he wasn't telling me. Over the next few weeks, Mark made an effort to be more open with me. He started coming home earlier, sitting down to dinner with me again, and sharing bits and pieces of what he was going through. He said he was feeling overwhelmed at work, unsure of his future, and like he was losing sight of who he was outside of our relationship. It wasn't easy to hear. Part of me wanted to shake him and scream, "You're not in this alone," but I knew that wouldn't help. Instead, I suggested we see a couples therapist. At first, he resisted, saying he didn't think it would help. But after a particularly emotional argument, he finally agreed. In therapy, we began to unpack years of unspoken feelings. I learned that Mark had been feeling restless for a long time, but he hadn't wanted to burden me with his fears. And Mark learned that his need for space had made me feel abandoned and unloved. It's been 6 months since that first therapy session, and while things aren't perfect, they're better. We're still figuring things out, one day at a time. Mark still talks to Ellie occasionally, but he makes a point to include me in the conversation now, to make sure I don't feel left out. And I'm learning to trust him again, slowly but surely. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that relationships aren't easy. They're messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. But they're also worth fighting for, if both people are willing to do the work. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening.